um, but I really wanted to do this video really quick. So it's okay if people can't hop on right now. I just wanted to get it out there, and if anybody does hop on, welcome, good to see you. But I really just wanted to talk about this Montana case. So if you're coming and watching later, go ahead and throw a comment on the video just to let me know that you saw it. But this is a case that I think a lot of people expected me to have a certain response to it. And some people actually messaged me through Tumblr expecting me to be thrilled with the Supreme Court in this instance and saying, look, see, the Supreme Court was on our side for this one. Or, some people kind of less good intent, not quite the same intent, came and said, well, you think the Supreme Court shouldn't rule on those cases, but it can rule on this one. And I'm saying, no, this was not a good case, even though it had an outcome that in some sense I like. There's aspects of the outcome that I like, but the case itself is a problem. So I want to explain that to you really quick. And so first I have to explain to you the case. And so here's the NPR article with this case on it. And it's a major victory for school choice. They have all this kind of language in here that like, this is about school choice. This is about people's ability to choose where they send their students to school. What this is about where public money goes, and it's about what the state constitution says. So, we can discuss the concept of if the government is going to give tax credits for schools, shouldn't it give tax credits for all schools or for donations? And that's what we're going to talk about this. So what the program really was is it was a tax credit if you donated to an organization that funds scholarships for schools. So there's kind of, it's not this like, oh, we're sending money to these schools. It was a tax credit for the donation. So you're donating to the fund is creating the scholarships are going to the school. So there's a couple of degrees of separation here. And the way that the program was set up was that you could do you could donate to any scholarship fund that supported students going to private schools. And then it was supposed to help students who otherwise couldn't afford private school go there. And that's awesome. I love it, except that, and I love the tax credit thing, that it's not just, oh, I'm going to hand you a check. It's actually, I'm going to reduce your taxes, because we shouldn't, we should be reducing our taxes anyway. So that part of the program I like. Now here's the issue. Okay, so the issue was that and I don't know if it says it in this, oh, yep, it does. So it says ultimately the Montana Supreme Court, so the state Supreme Court, this was a state law that affected people in the state of Montana, and the state Supreme Court struck it down. So, and here's why. They didn't strike it down because they hate Christians. They struck it down because it conflicted with the Montana state constitution. So to those people in Montana who, support school choice and support religious education, and you want the government to be fair to everybody, including religious schools, your problem is not with the Montana Supreme Court. Your problem is not with whoever sued, to get this case in front of the Montana Supreme Court. Your problem is with your state's constitution. And I'm going to go to that constitution right here. So I'm going to quick stop screen sharing, and then I'm going to start screen sharing and get to, there it is. So here's this constitution. This is the Montana State Constitution. And Article 10 is about education and public lands. So relevant to our discussion. And then if you scroll down to Section 6, and so I've literally just Googled. Here's the thing, guys. I don't have some like secret treasure trove of state constitutions or legal documents. This was Google. I went on Google and I searched Montana State Constitution, and I found the Montana State Constitution, and I went to the section about education, because it's about education. So it really was not that long of a research process here. It really was pretty simple. So we're going to go down here where it talks about aid prohibited to sectarian schools. So this is in the Constitution. This isn't a Montana law. This is in their Constitution. This is in Article 10 of their Constitution. It's not even an amendment, right? It's Article 10, Section 6. This, and I don't know when, if this was changed, maybe there was an amendment process here and it doesn't say so right here. I don't know when this became, I'm not going to go study the history of the Montana Constitution. The point is, somebody followed a process here, whether it was their initial constitutional convention when they drafted their state constitution or whatever the case may be, but somebody followed a process and they put this section in there and people ratified it. It was ratified as a state constitution. And it says the legislature, counties, cities, towns, school districts, and public corporations shall not make any direct or indirect appropriation or payment from any public fund or monies or any granted lands or other blah, 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 to any aid, church, school, academy, seminary, college, university, or other library or scientific institution controlled in whole or in part by any church, sect, or denomination. So, and it's pretty clear in there, and it says direct or indirect, and so the indirect would apply to a tax credit. That's indirect, even though technically you're just not collecting taxes. I could see the argument there that a tax credit is different because you're simply not collecting taxes, and it could fall under, just charitable donations. Like, I could see that. So that would be the argument for this, not the, well, you got to be fair to us, but the argument would be, well, this isn't taxpayer aid. This isn't taxpayer money. It's a tax credit. I'm paying less taxes, right? It's my money that I donated from my paycheck, right? That I now don't have to give to you, the government. So I can understand that argument. And if you wanted to make that argument, maybe they did, in the hearings, I don't know. But that would have been the argument to make, not you're being unfair and you're discriminating against Christians, right? Because right here, it says that if it's controlled by a religious institution, you can't give money to it, especially like if it's a school, a library, a seminary, a college, whatever. And as long as they're applying that consistently, if they're not also giving money to schools and to religious schools in other cases, if they're applying this consistently, then, then really that's your case. Now, if you want to change this, you don't go to the Supreme Court. You go through your amendment process. And literally all I'm going to do here is I'm going to Control F and I'm going to type I'm going to spell right. Amendments. And so talks about, bills or proposing amendments. And talks about, amending laws. But if you just kind of search through here, it talks about conventions. It talks about having a constitutional convention for amendments, right? So there's amendment process, amendment by legislative referendum. Here you go. Amendment by initiative, the people. Okay, so here we go. The people may propose constitutional amendments by initiative with a petition. It would have taken a petition. You do a petition, say we want to repeal this section of the Constitution, and you get enough people to sign it. You bring it in, or you get your legislators to do it, right? You don't get the Supreme Court. You amend your Constitution if you don't like what it says. You get enough people together, you get enough support from the people, who are the ones who give the Constitution force, from the people, okay? And that's the thing, it's like the government's not banning schools, it's not banning you from donating to these institutions. What it's saying is we're not going to give taxpayer dollars to these institutions, and that's in our Constitution. It's not just a law, it's not something somebody came up with, it's not an executive order, it's in their Constitution. So if you don't like it, which I don't like it, I wish it wasn't in there. I don't live in Montana, so it's really not, it's not something where I have necessarily any say. But if you're in Montana and you want this to be fixed, rather than going to the Supreme Court, you go and do a constitutional amendment. And there's a process in here, and it's right there, and it's a pretty clear process. So you go and do that constitutional amendment, you change that part of the Constitution, and now it's fine. The problem is, here's my problem. When you go into the Supreme Court and you say, my state is not being fair to me, not, this other state is not being fair to my state, not this other state is not, that I don't live in, is not being fair to me. They're discriminating against me. They're causing problems, whatever. So in my last live stream, when I talked about Roe v. Wade and the Constitution and the Supreme Court, I talked about how the Supreme Court in Article 3 is given jurisdiction over cases that involve multiple states or citizens of multiple states or a state in another country. They're not given jurisdiction over an individual state and their laws and policies. So what essentially just happened here was the Supreme Court of the United States overruled a state constitution. That's probably not the only time that's happened. I'm sure it's happened more than once. But that's a problem. And if you value the Constitution, if you value our freedom, if you value limited government, you should be very, very concerned by this case, because now what we have is the Supreme Court overruling a state constitution. Now, we may like the result. We say, yay, religious education. But that's a problem. It's a real problem if you're trying to limit the size of government in other areas, but you're okay with this because they're going to use this as precedent. I guarantee you, a year from now, 10 years from now, they're going to use this as precedent. They're going to say, well, in this case, we overruled the state constitution because they were violating religious liberty or whatever. And they're going to use it to overrule the constitution, a state constitution again in another state. And that's our problem. So yes, I love religious education. I grew up in religious schools. I grew up in Lutheran schools and one, non-denominational Christian school my entire life. Okay, and I got great education at religious schools. Great education. I had great teachers, loved them, great experience for the most part. It's school still. And I want people to be able to go to those schools. I want people to be able to go to private schools, especially people who otherwise couldn't afford them. I want these scholarship organizations to exist. I want them to grant scholarships. I want people to donate to them. But what I don't want is the Supreme Court to overrule a state constitution over a tax credit. Or over anything for that matter, because that's a state constitution. Now, if the state constitution had something in there that affected another state, then we might have an issue for the Supreme Court, but it doesn't. It affects the citizens of Montana, the people of Montana, people of the state are the ones who are supposed to deal with this, not the federal government, not the Supreme Court. So that's my rant, it's Katie rants. That's my rant on this issue. And yes, I'm get fired up about these things, but I really just want you to understand why I feel this strongly about this case and why I'm not as supportive of it as I would have probably been a year ago. Actually, even just a couple months ago, I probably would have looked at this case and seen it as a cause for celebration. But today, with everything that I'm learning about the Constitution and federal overreach and how federal overreach happens, we cannot let these things go, even when it looks like they're on our side. So I would really encourage, if you live in Montana or you know somebody who lives in Montana who was happy about the Supreme Court decision, I really hope, and I know it's probably a long shot, but I would love it if somebody who's part of one of these groups in Montana that pushed for this, that pushed for the religious schools to be able to receive funding, I really want them to see this video or hear this argument, whether you explain it to them or you show them my video or whatever it is. And I really want them to understand that they can't stop at, oh, the Supreme Court says we can do this, now we're good. I want them to go and actually go through the process and amend the Constitution if you're going to keep doing this, because otherwise you're violating your Constitution. And if you're going to rely on the Supreme Court to keep telling you that you can violate your state constitution, you're in for a lot of problems down the line. So please, if you live in Montana, if you're part of, if you were excited about the Supreme Court decision and you're watching this video because you're saying, what in the world was the problem with it? Please start the conversations. How do we get a petition going? How do we get enough signatures? We can put this on a ballot. Maybe not this election, maybe not this vote, maybe on a future one. Maybe we can hold a special election, whatever it is, but let's change this amendment. Let's go through the process. And if we can't go through the process, maybe we need to rethink the program. If we go through the process and we don't get enough support to change the state constitution, maybe we need to rethink this program. Maybe we need to find another way to incentivize people to donate. Maybe we don't need to use the government to incentivize people to donate. Maybe we can use other things. That'd be great, like fundraisers. Yeah. So I'm just, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, this is what the Constitution says. You can't, you can argue with your Constitution. You can say, hey, I don't like this, and you can go through an amendment process. But to say, Montana's not being fair, Supreme Court help, it just opens the door for a lot of problems. So that was my video. Thank you those who are watching later. I don't know if anybody's watching right now, but thank you. And I'll see you guys another time soon.